Hello. I'm going to start. Can you see me, or do you just see a pink jumper floating? No, I'm being serious. Can you see me? Yes. Yay. Oh, God, I can see you too. Thank you, Helga, for that. I was listening to the last speaker, and she talked about her schizophrenia, and I think part of the person that I am now is because my sister had schizophrenia when I was 12 years old, and I decided that nobody was talking to her. And I used to sit on the bed, and she'd take me into her world, which was completely insane. And in between her ranting and raving, in between her getting lost on buses and being returned, we had a fantastic time because she was in an alternative reality, which I found really compelling. And my parents are African, you wouldn't have guessed. And they had a list, a bit like Justice's list. And I was either going to run Kenya, okay, or I was going to be a psychiatrist. And if I couldn't do that, I needed to become the Attorney General. There was only one tiny problem: I was a girl. Anyway, long story short, because of what happened to my sister, I knew in my gut that at some point I needed to find a way to be involved in talking therapies. So anyway, the TED theme is about marking the map, and the map that I'm really interested in is the internal map that we each carry, because it's unique, and it's the one map nobody can take away from us. What I'm particularly interested in are the marks in that map that we each make every time we learn something, each time we develop, each time we grow. Now, I'd love to talk about your maps, but I can't because I don't know you. And even if I tried, I'd be giving you a version that wasn't real of your map. So what I'm going to do is talk about the map of me. And the reason I want to talk about the map of me is because I've got one idea that I really want to share. So starting with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says, the core idea I want to share is the paradox about change. When Helga told you that story about my CV, it was absolutely true. I had been a broadcaster. She got two facts wrong. I didn't go to the LSE, I went to SOAS and then UCL. And I was an economic and financial analyst in the Isle of Dogs. Now, I did a lot of jobs, and Helga's mum at lunchtime said, "What are you now? What do you do now? Can't you settle down with one thing?" And actually, I'm not sure I can, and I don't even know whether I want to. But all the stuff that I did then, first of all, it was to go, "Mum, Dad, see ya. I'm not going to be what you want me to be." I thought that's what I was doing. And I went from job to job, and I had a lot of chutzpah. Now, if a little African woman, immigrant, can go to the BBC and go, "I want a job," and get it, you guys can. If you get up in the morning and look at your job and think, "What is this? Does it feed me? Does it make me feel as though I'm alive?" If the answer to all three of those questions is yes, fantastic. If it isn't, change. Take that risk. Every single time that I've changed my job, it's been really amazing. However, it's the way that we do it. So what I've learned about myself is, certainly from the age of about 13 to 34, I changed the external world in an attempt to manipulate how you thought of me. So even though I met lots of people and learned so much, and it was really fantastic, and that's still part of me, I don't do it in that way anymore. I think I've exhausted myself from trying to be who I think you want me to be. Does that make sense? I keep trying to think, what do you want me to be? If I walk into a room and there's a huge number of people, do you know what? I'm going to spot the one person who's looking at me going, "Who do you think you are?" And I will make a beeline for that person, and I will try to convince them I am who they want me to be. I don't know if you remember this film by Woody Allen in 1983 called Zelig. Does anybody remember Zelig? It's a really strange little film. So Zelig is this character who ends up in newspaper articles, films, and photographs from really important points in history. And wherever he is, he fits in. If he's with a group of famous jazz musicians, he's black. If he's with a group of Chinese doctors, he's Chinese. And I think what I was doing from the age of 13 to 34, I was Zeliging. okay? I was trying to fit in. The other day I was listening to some audio tapes by a woman called Brené Brown, and she talks about all sorts of wonderful things like shame and vulnerability and worthiness. And she said something which literally made me sit up. She said, there is a difference between fitting in and belonging. The whole time I was doing a Zelig, I was desperate to fit in. What I really wanted to do was what I think most of us want to do. I just wanted to belong. That's all. I just wanted to belong. So what I want to do now is talk about the paradox of change, of belonging, and of making things happen. And there was a big change in my life about 7 years ago. I finally decided to retrain as a Gestalt Psychotherapist. And, you know, that was the thing that I wanted to do for my sister. And I started doing that training a couple of years before she died. One of the things about Gestalt therapy is that it's a very experimental existential therapy. And there's something called two-chair work. And so there's a therapist who says, now speak to the empty chair. And I'm like, I don't think so. So I did that, you know, I paid her good money, and I would go week after week, and I would go, my mom, my dad. And she'd go, talk to the chair. And I'm thinking, you talk to the chair. Eventually, I spoke to the chair. It was a very strange experience. I felt as though I was faking it. And I started talking to the chair, and I talked, and then I suddenly heard myself say, why the hell should my life be a success? If my life is a success, people will think you were a good enough mother. That was utterly shocking to me. I hadn't realized that I had spent nearly 30 years trying to learn my mother that she wasn't good enough. I didn't realize also that I'd spent 30 years attempting to change the minds of people who told me 3 really big, uncomfortable truths. The first one was, you're too much. Apparently, I was too black. I was too thin. I was too fat. I was too loud. I was just too much. The other thing was that I was too sensitive, on top of which I was too intense. And then the third one was, I was a disappointment. I wasn't a boy. I didn't become a judge. I'm not running Kenya. What the hell is this? I'm living in Birmingham, thank God. And you know, I know that I work very, very hard to try and not be those things. After all, who wants to be too much, too intense, too disappointing? But in doing so, I got involved in trying to achieve my full potential, which for me was the potential I thought I wanted you to have. What I didn't realize was that all the people who'd been telling me, all the self-help books I'd read, all this stuff kept saying, be yourself, be yourself, be yourself. I just couldn't hear it. It was like, no, that's too simple. That can't be right. There's no. It's not about being myself. It's about being me, like this. Anyway, so there I am, beginning to study Gestalt therapy because I'm thinking, this is kick-ass, 2 chairs, yeah. So I come across a number of theories that just absolutely blew the top of my head off, but also changed my life, really changed my life. First one I want to share is by Arnold Baser, who was a 25-year-old doctor and a tennis star who got polio. And this was a few months, this was just a few months before the polio vaccine. I'm so nervous. If I was hooked up, I'd liked Birmingham. I'll tell you what he said about this incident in his own words. In a few hours, without warning, I was transformed from a doctor to a patient, from an athlete to a cripple. Polio had ravaged me so that I could not stand, walk, sit, eat, drink, or even breathe by myself. What he then did was fully invest in who he was as somebody who was living initially in an iron lung. He was already a doctor, he trained as a psychotherapist. He worked as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and that's the work he did. He then lectured in psychiatry and psychotherapy, and when he could no longer lecture because he couldn't breathe, he wrote about it. And one of the theories that he came up with in the 1970s was based on that lived experience of about 25 years. And this was his theory. If we want to make meaningful change happen, we have to be utterly ourselves. In this moment, in this situation, in contact with these people, because that is the sphere of influence that we have. What I love about that is that for me, what that said is, do you know what? First of all, I can be myself. I can tolerate being myself one conversation at a time. I can tolerate being myself one moment at a time. But this theory was like a bunch of Russian dolls. So take Arnold Baser out, and what's underneath? Gosh, in order to change my life, I just need to be myself. Because if I'm myself, new choices open up. Oh, so who is myself? What is this thing called self? Well, blow me, there's no such thing as self. There's a man called Thomas Metzinger, who's a neuroscientist and philosopher, who basically says self is a process. Self is a process of contacts. That is so liberating for me. It means that I can be myself with you, and then I can be myself with you, and then I can be myself with you. It's a bit like being Toad in Toad Hall, who would just go, oh, this is who I am in this room, and that's my truth in this room. But to be able to be Toad with integrity. And I love that idea, the fact that we are each ourselves, and another self, and another self. So self is a process of contacts. Then there's another doll inside that doll. And this doll says, oh, in order to be myself, I need to experience you. Now, for a person who is wired like me, the idea of contact was very, very frightening, because contact had meant that you were going to come up with another list of too muches, to this, to that, or to the other. I defended against contact a lot. So what I had to learn to do was to be available for genuine contact, which for me just means stand still and listen to the other person. Stand still and listen to the other person with my whole body. Let my shoulders down and don't presume I know anything about them or what they're about to say. That I can do. Honestly, I can do that for up to 20 minutes at a time. Ka-ching. As a psychotherapist, that has extended. I can do that for hours. It's fantastic. And not only that, people are extraordinary. I have not had a single conversation in the last 16 years which hasn't changed the way that I saw the world. I haven't had a single moment today which hasn't made me question some of my perceptions, some of my best ideas. I find that so exciting and so liberating. However, as simple as it sounds, it's actually been really difficult, because however much work I do, I still want to manipulate the outside to fit the shape of the world that I want. So for me, it's progress, not perfection. So the paradox about change is that we need to stand in our truth, not our patterns. I've had to start breaking my patterns. They keep crawling back like gremlins. Yeah? On a bad day, I water them. I give them fags, I give them booze, and they go, wah! And then I go, shut up, goodbye. And I'm back in the moment. And everything changes. I used to think that real change, meaningful change, it meant doing things like, protesting against the bankers and all that sort of stuff. Actually, real change means, what am I doing about it, other than sitting in front of the television and screaming? So get real, stand in your truth, not your patterns, be available for contact, and then the final one, and I saved it till last, because for me, it won't be for you, but for me, it's been the most difficult. Get support, offer support. In order to experience myself more and more as I really am, I've actually had to look in the eyes of people who think more of me than I think of myself. I've had to actually sit with people, and when they tell me that I'm doing something well, not to go, shucks, to actually sit with that, really sit with it. I've had to look in the eyes of people who say they love me, properly look in their eyes, because I didn't know how to love myself. I'm pinging all the time, but I've had to learn to do that in contact with you. And in order to do that, I've had a lot of support. I'm totally shameless. If you told me today that there was a soothsayer in the toilet who was going to give me the key so that I could live happily ever after, I would be there. If I didn't have to do the hard work of being myself, being in contact, standing in my truth, I probably wouldn't do it. But it's work worth doing. So how does this play out in real time? Very briefly, I'll tell you about a couple of projects that I've done where I've taken this stuff absolutely out of the therapy room into the real world. So I spent about 3 months in Paris about a year ago at a UN agency where they'd lost a lot of money and they were just pushing people out of the door. And I worked with people around these principles. And just one quick statistic, which was when I first started the work, 56% of the senior managers felt completely unsupported, completely disconnected from each other and their organization. After 3 months worth of work where we did purposeful conversations, where I gave lots of contact, I gave a lot of myself, I stood in my truth and supported them to stand in theirs. And what I was really doing was not giving them anything else. It was like being a plumber, you know. I was just getting rid of some of the bullshit. And what happened, we did surveys all the way through, and what happened at the end of that was 86% of the people said not only did they feel self-supported, but they felt that they were able to give support to other people. They also described having more empathy, being more able to see the world from other people's point of view. These are people who really absolutely started to just be themselves. There's a tiny project that I'm just beginning to develop in India, working with the poorest women. And one of the things that I discovered is the traditional donor-benefactor relationship is, I'm going to do good for you, and you're going to love it. And I didn't like that at all. One of the things that really struck me was, poor people are so creative. I could not survive the conditions they survive. Not a week. And they live like this year in, year out. They duck, they dive, they adjust, they create. And so the project that I'm doing, it starts with the end in mind. We are going to learn from them how they mobilize their creative adjustments, how they mobilize themselves, and what we can do with them to support them to access what's already on the ground. I'm really excited about that project, and I'm terrified about it. I take big risks every day these days. And you know, I used to think that big risks were the next job that I would apply for. I'm not employable. I'm not. I make a dreadful employee. I've run organizations. People used to get really angry with me because I'm not good at that either. What really matters to me is not bricks and mortar, it's people. Bottom line, it's people every time for me. So let me tell you my job description. I'm 50 now. This is my job description until I'm 80. What I do is help people, myself included, to light up from the inside out. One conversation at a time. One contact episode at a time. Because if I'm doing that work, I light up. Thank you.